understood together. Called of God, the three expressions of vocation. The general call, the invitation to follow Jesus, to be Christian. The specific call, a vocation that is unique to a person, that individual's mission in the world. The immediate responsibilities, those tasks or duties God calls us to today. This book will focus on the second of these three aspects of our calling, and this is the primary way I will be using the word calling or vocation, not as an occupation or line of work, but something that nevertheless speaks of our engagement with the world in response to God. But we must consider this second sense of call in light of the other two dimensions noted. Our vocation is a critical means by which we fulfill the call to be a disciple of Jesus. Part of what it means to follow Christ is to accept His specific and unique call on our lives. But we must consider the immediate duties and obligations we have as Christians, as members of families, as spouses, and as friends. The daily demands on our lives are not necessarily threats to the fulfillment of our vocation, the second meaning of call. They are all part of what it means to be called of God. Because vocation in the second sense is part of, but only part of, what it means to be a Christian, we must see our specific and unique vocations within the context of all that it means to be called to be Christian. This will require that we move away from compartmentalization of our lives. We are whole people, complex people, people who fulfill our callings within the whole setting of circumstances, problems, and relationships that constitute what it means to be a Christian. I, for example, fulfill my vocation as husband to Joella, father to 2 sons, and grandfather to 3 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. This is an unavoidable and vital dimension of my life, and I cannot consider and think constructively about my work in the world apart from these realities. What follows is a guide to thinking about calling in the second meaning described earlier. But when thinking well about calling or vocation in this sense, we do so within the context of all three dimensions of what it means to be called by God. Navigating transitions. Transition is one of the givens in our lives, and we only live well, we only manage our lives well when we manage these transitions well. Our world changes, the circumstances of our lives change, the economy changes and forces change in our lives. For those of us who work in the church, the dynamics around us change and we either adapt and respond or we lose our moorings. If we are facing a transition, it is often due to one of 3 factors. First, inevitable transitions flow from the normal course of a human life. We grow up, we leave home, perhaps we marry. If we marry, we may have children. If we do, this brings us yet another transition. Indeed, many parents note that it is not merely the experience of a child. Having a second or third brings yet another transition that calls for a faithful and hopeful response. The transition into early adulthood is but the first of a series of changes that will intersect our lives as we make the pilgrimage through life. We grow up and grow older and move through midlife. As young adults, there are many things that we might have taken for granted that in midlife we no longer view as a given or an assumption of our lives. The biggest assumptions that are challenged may include coming to terms with our limits. On the other hand, we know ourselves better. As we grow older, we come to a deeper appreciation of what matters most to us. The transitions through our early and mid-adult years are but the first rounds of what for many will be the biggest challenge of our lives, the transition into our senior years. Perhaps it could be said that we only truly live well in the end when we graciously manage this transition into the last season of our earthly lives. Speaking of vocation, work, and career necessarily means that we consider how the diverse chapters of our lives reflect new challenges, opportunities, and circumstances. And there is no other way to speak of calling but in a recognition that these inevitable transitions call for a mature and generous response. Some will no doubt approach this book hoping to find guidance and wisdom for the early adult years, the transitions out of their parents' home and into the marketplace. For others, this book will be helpful as they navigate the changing circumstances of their middle years, and yet guidance.